Hello, and welcome to the Wordsmith Forge Christian Fiction Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Baines. We are gaining an impressive library of Christian fiction authors. If you are new to this podcast, look back on previous episodes to discover a writer that catches your imagination. Please hit that subscribe button so you are alerted to new episodes as they are published. We appreciate it anytime someone gives us a like. That's how we know we're reaching people. Let's get to this episode's guest. Robert, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Well, I'm Robert Elmer, and I write out of my home here in Northwest Washington State, and I've been doing this for, has it been 30 years now? And writing mostly for kids in the 8 to 12 year old bracket, so middle readers. That's kind of where my heart is, and have some grandkids that age now, and still writing those kind of books. Also writing a few books for grown-ups, but probably talk about the middle grade books this time around. My wife and I have lived in parts of western Washington most of our married life, between Olympia and we lived in Idaho for a while, but here in Linden, Washington, it's a little dairy farming community just a few miles from the Canadian border, and we've raised our kids here, and they're raising their kids here, and aside from the ones that went off to be missionaries in South America.
Oh my!
So there's still a few grandkids around here.
Got to have those grandkids close.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I tell my children, if I had only known how much fun grandkids were, I'd have had them first.
Why didn't I think of that too?
Yeah, they're so great.
Yeah.
Well, there where you live, is there someplace close where you like to go to kind of refresh your batteries and renew your soul? Well,
the beautiful part about Northwest Washington, and a lot of communities are like the one we live in, but this is a small town. But you can see the Mount Baker from where we live, big old snow-capped mountain. It's gorgeous. And less than a half an hour's drive away, you get to the beach, to Puget Sound. And that's where I tend to gravitate towards when I need some refreshment or salt air, or it's a good place to hike the beach. So my wife and I do that and get out every once in a while. So between the mountain and the beach and the Canadian border, there's all kinds of things to go to. It's a beautiful area.
Certainly, it certainly is. To kind of crack the door on who Robert Elmer is a little bit, what are 3 of your favorite songs?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me 3 of my favorite movies.
That's next.
Oh. Oh, boy. You know, I'm always kind of scratch my head when people ask me for my favorite this or that, because I'll answer it one way today, and I'd answer it another way tomorrow when I hear a new worship song. I tend to, in between, when I'm writing something that doesn't require too much concentration, then I turn on some worship songs in the background. And I was just listening to some before this interview when you called up, and there was I think it was a Laura Story worship song, and that would be my favorite right now. But I can't remember what it was called.
Well, it's the flavor of the day.
Yeah, it was good.
Okay, now you can tell us about your movies.
Okay, I was ready. I was ready for that one.
You've watched the podcast, so you know that's one of the questions I like to ask.
That's right. And wasn't it James Rubart who said that if you tell him 3 of your favorite movies, he'll tell you what kind of, what was it, personality you have or something?
He'll tell you the theme of your life.
Oh, okay. So I don't know what the theme of my life is, because I'm a sap. You know, my favorite movies are musicals.
Oh.
So aside from It's a Wonderful Life, which is my all-time favorite, and I've seen it umpteen times, Jimmy Stewart is the best. My favorites tend to be musicals like Sound of Music, and maybe even South Pacific. I don't know. Rodgers and Hammerstein were good, and those three is what I would probably put as my three favorites.
Yeah.
So what does Jim say about me?
Well,
I don't know what the formula is.
he'll have to get back with us on that after he thinks about the movies. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
So what about your walk with Christ? Would you mind sharing with us your walk with Christ?
Sure. I was raised in a mainline denomination, a Lutheran denomination. My parents are immigrants from Denmark, and everybody in Denmark is Lutheran, so that's the way I was raised. But just a churchgoer, really, until I was 17 and went to a home Bible study down the street some high school friends invited me to, and I was confronted with the reality of what is a personal relationship with Christ? Wow! I'd never heard of such a thing, and gave my heart over to the Lord when I was 17.
Oh my. Yeah.
And my life was turned upside down and sideways in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, went to Bible college, went out street witnessing, was on fire for the Lord. And this is in the San Francisco Bay Area where I was raised.
Oh my, yeah.
So met my wife at Bible college, and we both wanted to be missionaries, except I was always going to be a writer too. And how to combine those two things, I wasn't quite sure. But through the years, we raised our 3 kids. And I was active in journalism, which is what I basically went to college for. Mm-hmm. Was a newspaper reporter and a newspaper editor at a small town paper. But grew in the Lord year by year. And then our kids flew the coop, and we started having grandkids. And then it becomes, what kind of a grandparent am I going to be for? So that's basically my story.
How much does your faith influence your writing?
Yeah, that's a good question, because without my faith, there would be no writing. The first books that I started writing were for kids, and basically for my own kids, telling the story of a couple of Danish kids during the World War II, and based on stories that my parents told me. And in the course of those stories, they're action adventure, but I wanted to weave what a little kid, a 12-year-old, 11-year-old, 13-year-old would experience spiritually during those years. And I guess a lot of my own background would rub off on that too. But without faith, boy, there would be nothing to my stories. They're fun to read and everything, but there's a basis of a child learning about the Lord. It depends on the character, but they are either learning to get to know Jesus, or in their faith grow in their faith. So that's a given in my stories.
Some people have editors. That's kind of a layer. They have a publisher. That's another layer. And then, of course, the reader. And all authors and writers have that. But Christian writers have another layer that's above that.
Right.
And you can read anything you want to read. You can almost say, okay, God's got his hand on this person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when I write stories for middle readers, I don't necessarily want it to be like a Sunday school lesson.
Right.
I want it to be something that a non-Christian kid would pick up and say, wow, that's an exciting story. And then as we all, I think most of us read stories in the same way. We can't help identifying with the main characters, right? And we put ourselves in their place. And that's what I want to see happen, whether it's a Christian reader or a non-Christian reader, to put themselves in the place of the characters and then experience what that whole scene would be like, and whether the books are from World War II or World War I, Australian pioneer stories or Cold War stories, all different times of history. They can understand what the people back then were going through and relate to that, but also in the spiritual journey there, they see how integrated that is and how you can't take that apart. It's part of their lives.
Yeah.
So that's important to me, is to integrate the spiritual aspect of the stories in a natural way, in a way that makes sense to the reader, and in a way that they can identify with and say, could I try out that experience too? I got one of my prized letters ever was from a little girl in South Carolina who wrote me years back. The first books in the Young Underground series, the World War II series, came through in the early mid-90s. And she wrote me a long letter, and it said that she and her mom were reading through those books. And in the beginning, she said, I wasn't a Christian when I picked up your book, but then I read about Peter Anderson and about his struggles and how he turned to Christ. And by the end of the book, I prayed with my mama, and I received Christ. And I think, was this supposed to be an evangelistic tract? It wasn't really. I just wanted to write a real exciting story about things that my own parents had gone through in occupied Denmark during World War II, and then having that spiritual lesson and that spiritual journey as well. But she was along for the ride, and it was very real, and it changed her life. And so I thought, okay, I guess if nothing else, I wrote a book for a little girl in South Carolina, and that's good enough.
If you never wrote another piece,
absolutely.
I think that's what a blessing. My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, just let that soak in for a moment.
That's the power of what the Holy Spirit can do through fiction, I think. And sometimes, you go to a library and you think, oh, there's fiction. That's not really true stories. Or there's nonfiction. That's true stories. And there's a place for both. But God uses them in His own ways, and it could be a story about a pioneer family going to Australia, like in my second series that I did, Promise Adventures Down Under. Sorry.
Yeah.
And those kids have their own spiritual track, as it were. So God uses it all.
But. Everything you write, even though it's fiction, it comes from someplace that's nonfiction, and it's just a different way to apply nonfiction principles and ideas.
Right, right. And I wrote it to, thinking this is going to be a 10-year-old or 12-year-old reading this, because I know that when I was 10 or 12 years old, going to the library every week, and I know that not all kids are like this, but I would go to the library and come home with just piles of books and devour them and read them, and then the next week I'd go back and exchange them for another pile of books. But whether or not a kid's an active reader, if they do get a hold of the books, they're at an impressionable age, and to have examples and stories that they can relate to with characters they can relate to, that's what I try to do.
When I was a kid, I was raised by a single mom. My dad died when I was 5. She worked long hours. There was still 2 older sisters at home, but I had no contact with males. And so I really wanted to know what men were like, what they thought, and the normal stuff that a kid absorbs sitting around the dinner table,
right?
Just, talking about insurance or changing oil, or of course we didn't have a car, but so I wound up going to the library and reading books about Jim Bridger and trappers and mountain men. So.
Biographies.
So I quit taking showers and started talking rough and treating other people. I start fights and things because that's what men did. Nobody liked me. I don't know why.
Surprise.
Yeah. So anyway, it's good to get biblically based books in front of especially kids that are a bit adrift, like I was. I don't know whether I would have absorbed things differently, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, these kind of stories let kids try on from the safety of their under the covers bedroom. What happens if you act this way? Yeah. What happens if this happens? What happens if disaster strikes? What are the different ways of reacting to that? And what happens when you pray? And they can try on all kinds of scenarios that they would never have experienced on their own in their own little world. And it's the power of fiction, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Very important. So do you have a book in progress now?
I do. I have piled up here next to my computer all the 25 or so of the historical fiction books that I've written. I mentioned the World War II stories. Those were based on stories that my grandmother and parents told me when they were living in Copenhagen during the World War II. And some of those stories are just amazing what they went through. I mentioned the Australian stories, and that's from the 1850s, Irish family that goes, their dad is unjustly convicted of a crime and sent to Australia. So they follow him and all the things that happened. There's 8 more books, and then there's a series called The Promise of Zion, which is set in 1947, 1948 Israel, and that one was a lot of fun to write. But some of the things going on there were pretty intense. And another series called Life Behind the Wall, which is a multi-generational story of kids that live in basically Berlin and in occupied Berlin, starting with the Berlin airlift in 1948, jumping ahead to another generation in 1961 that sees the wall go up, and then a third generation in 1989 that sees the wall go down, and see how those lives are intertwined.
Yeah.
But you asked what I'm working on right now, and I just can't stop writing good historical fiction. So I'm writing a story of a pioneer family that goes to the woods of North Idaho during World War I. And just kind of their little house on the prairie adventures and what happens to them as they've immigrated from Europe and settle down in the backwoods and encounter bears and fishing, adventures with steamboats and all the different things that happened also during the home front in World War I in 1917, 1918. So I'm working on a series of those. There's a few books of those. I have a story that's based on Route 66 in the early 60s about a couple of kids who escaped their not so nice foster parents in Chicago and stow away in the trunk of their grandfather's taxi on the way across the U.S. to find their mom in California.
Oh, wow.
And that's called the Cooper's Due Route 66. And it's a different way of seeing the country. They get out of the trunk of the car pretty quick. That's not very comfortable.
Yeah, I imagine not.
But they have to put up with their grandpa for the rest of the trip. And then I'm working on a biography too. It's set during World War II, and it covers. It's a true story. It's not fiction in this one, but it's for kids, and it's about 2 men at the opposite ends of the spectrum. One is named Jake DeShazer. He's one of the Doolittle Raiders. He's in the Army Air Corps in the 1942 and takes part in the bombing of Tokyo, but is shot down or crashes. They ran out of gas, and put in a Japanese prison camp for 3 years, the rest of the war, and how he comes to know the Lord in a prison camp, gets released, and goes right back to Japan to be a missionary.
Oh my!
But the second part of that is is the man who led the Pearl Harbor attack, the Japanese pilot, and what happened to him after the war. He survived the war, but he started reading a little evangelistic booklet that told the story of Jake the Chaser, and got curious about the Bible. So two sworn enemies who would have killed each other in the 40s or during the World War II become brothers, and how that their lives are intertwined. So that's a kind of a dual biography that I'm working on for kids.
Interesting. Yeah.
Like I said, not fiction, that one, but it's got some. It reads like a fiction book.
Well, I think kind of backing up a little, I think it's just so interesting that you can take your grandparents' real stories, and it's provided you this rich history to write your fiction from.
Well, it started out being more like one of those books that you write for your family kind of thing. You know, here's fill in the blanks. What happened when you were a little kid? What happened?
Yeah.
You know, those kind of things. I just wanted to know my own kids to know what their grandparents and great grandparents had gone through during a really crazy, extraordinary time in history, and what they had to endure. As my dad tells a story of, you know, just looking out the window and seeing German tanks rolling down the street of outside his apartment block building in Copenhagen. What was that like? I mean, that must have been,
yeah.
I can't imagine. And so I started to write a story that would explain that in a way that my own kids would understand and be able to take home. And it wasn't the exact story of Grandpa Elmer and what he went through, but it was characters who had experienced some of the same things. And so it was a way of relating to them. Well, once I got into that, then it turned into a book. And I thought, well, maybe somebody else wants to read it too, rather than just my three kids. And I sent it off to a publisher and pretty much went from there. Bethany House in Minneapolis took it on, and they said, well, that's a great story, but how about we do a series? I thought, a series?
Yeah.
Turned into 8 books, and
oh my,
we went from there. It's hard for kids in our society to relate to some of those things. It's hard for even adults to believe that history repeats itself.
Yeah.
But it's important to me to be able to tell stories that kids can connect to people of the past, of past generations, and to see, well, what happened when these kind of freedoms are taken away? What is it like to live under those situations? Do we want to make sure that it doesn't happen again? It's a cautionary tale, but it's also a connection to Christians in past years, because our tendency can sometimes be to live in this bubble, and kids, adults alike, we forget history, we forget those who go before us, we forget what really mattered to them, and then we go on repeat the same mistakes. And in my parents' case, you know, they were just little kids. My dad was a young teenager. My mom was a young girl during World War II. And in my mom's case, her older brother would disappear at night. And she didn't quite know why. You know, she's 7, 8 years old, something like that. And Big Brother is just sneaking out at night all the time and comes back and it's almost daylight. What's he been doing? Well, he was part of a resistance movement that went out and blew up railroad tracks, and he couldn't talk about it. He didn't talk about it. No. And she never really heard all the stories until maybe a little bit later. Yeah. And so I had characters in my books that followed what my uncle did during the war too. But you know, all those things, we it's hard for us to imagine.
Yeah.
It's hard. I mean, the most we have is cases of, well, somebody is limiting our free speech, or somebody is getting mad at us because we have certain political opinions, or those kinds of things, which in the bigger scheme of things are relatively mild, but there's a slope, it goes from one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. And at least that's the way it's happened in the past. And if we know what the past is, and if kids know what the past is, even from a younger age, then they could be part of the solution and rather the problem. So
yeah, I wish I had taken notes when my mother was alive and pumped her for more information, but little information I do know is just things that I had a hard time believing. I know there would be a lot of stories, a lot of books I could have written if I could have known I should take notes.
Take notes. That's the lesson we get from this interview. Take notes. Learn your family history. Learn what people went through and remember it. It's good.
I think people don't realize that right now, especially young people, right now, you're creating history in years to come.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be really interesting for people to read about what things were like right now, years from now.
Yeah. So, yeah. Some of the stuff will be like, I don't believe it. You're making this up.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there a character in your book that you tend to relate to?
Well, most of the characters in my book, the main characters, and when I've spoken with groups of kids, a lot of them ask me that same question. Did you write yourself into these books?
Yeah.
Did you write yourself into the characters? And I think most fiction authors, write through the lens of their own experience as much as possible, sometimes unconsciously. But I don't think that any one character in any one of my books is me necessarily, but I put my own understanding and my own way of looking at things sometimes into main characters. I think of Peter Anderson, who's the main character in the Young Underground series, and his journey to faith. It happens throughout a couple books. It doesn't happen all at once. But he learns about Jesus through his uncle. And he has doubts along the way, but it takes him a while to kind of process through the whole thing and come to a place where he comes to know the Lord. And part of that's my own experience. It took me a while as a teenager, as I said before, but I think I put a lot of myself into Peter Anderson, who's 11 and 12 and 13 in the series. So maybe I put myself into some of the other main characters. There was one main character in the Promise of Zion series, the Israel 1947-1948 series. His name was Dove. D-O-V, and I modeled him actually on a Polish man that I met. Rhonda, my wife Rhonda, and I went to Israel, to Jerusalem, to research that series, and I had read a testimony of a Messianic Jew who grew up in Poland during World War II and survived the Warsaw Ghetto. His family said, after the war, if we survive this, let's all meet in Jerusalem. So after the war, he survived it somehow. He went to Jerusalem to look for the rest of his family, couldn't find him, but he was handed a Bible by a Christian missionary at the time, and he read it and turned his life over to Christ. And so I wanted to find out more about his experience so I could have an authentic character. Because this was a little bit more foreign to me than I was prepared to write about. I couldn't just make up a lot of details. I had to have a real model, and so I I got in touch with him on the phone when we were in Jerusalem, and he said, "Oh yeah, come over to our place. I'll tell you the whole story." And so the journalist in me is just, all right, this is good. I have a character to go on. And I got in a taxi and gave the taxi driver the address. Taxi driver drops me off on the outskirts of Jerusalem in front of these big high-rise, these 20-story high-rise buildings, apartments. I get out, pay the guy, he leaves, and I go, okay, how am I going to find Zvi? I'll do what you would think, and you go up to an apartment and you see the list of names and you press a button and it buzzes their apartment, right? And you go in and they let you in. So I go up to that name list and I realized I am in trouble. All these names are in Hebrew. I cannot make head or tail. I should have taken Hebrew in Bible college because I was lost. And I stood there in the middle of a foreign country now. It's getting dark. Nobody's around. I'm staring at this list of Hebrew names. I can't make the. I'm in trouble, and I must have stood there for 5 minutes, just kind of, what do I do? What do I do? Who's going to help me? And finally, somebody poked their head out of a lower story window and yelled something at me. They must have said in Hebrew, "Hey, crazy American, what are you doing down there?" Yeah. I don't know. Finally, I said, Zvi Kalisher, and I don't know, they disappeared again. And they finally brought him out. He came to the door. "Oh, hello, Robert. Good to see you. Glad you made it." And I got rescued, but for a few minutes there, I was in big trouble. Anyway, all that to answer your question about my favorite character, Dove in the books, in the Promises I Am books, was one of my favorite characters, but it wasn't me. It was modeled on a real life person and what he went through as a Polish refugee and everything like that. So I have kind of a I have fun making up the characters, whether it's me or not.
Was there anything when you were writing that your character jumped up and surprised you with something you weren't expecting?
Has the character ever surprised me? They're surprising me more and more. When I started out writing in the early 1990s, 30 years ago, I was more of an outliner. And the publisher that I worked with, wonderful people at Bethany House, my editors worked with me to kind of outline the stories pretty much in detail before we even started. And that would include what happens to the characters and their story arc, what are they learning, what are they going through, what are they experiencing. And I would write off of that outline from book to book to book to book. And we did that series after series. And it worked. That's one way of writing it. But as I've written a few more books, in fact, the latest books, I have more of a rough idea of what the character is going to experience rather than something that's pretty precisely outlined. So that's the difference between outliners and seat of the pantsers. And I've become a little bit more of a seat of the pantser in later books, so that when I'm writing, I just drop a character into a situation and see what happens. Yeah. And then there's that full of discovery. I'm having fun discovering what this person is, how they're going to react, and what they're going to say, and what they're going to do. So the answer is yes. It happens all the time now when I'm writing historicals. I know what the historical background is, and I love to research things, just find out what was going on in that part of the country at that time, 1917 or 1962 or whenever the year is. Gather as many facts as I can, and just toss that person in there and watch what happens. Sink or swim. That's right. You're right. And sometimes they sink. Got to get them out of there. They got into the cave in Missouri on the 1962 trip on Route 66, and they got away from the tour guide and started, what's going to happen next? I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to get them out of that mess, but how are we going to do that? Yeah. So, yeah, that's the fun part of it.
Well, as we talked earlier about one of my books, I started out just to write this one story, and then another one just wouldn't be quiet, and wedged its way in almost every other chapter.
And that's how the Promise of Zion Israel books came about. When I started writing the World War II books, of course, one of the main characters was a Jewish kid who was rescued in 1943. All the Danes rescued their Jewish population and sent them over to Sweden to safety when the Germans were going to round them up, and 7,000 plus, they got whisked away into people's cellars and on fishing boats underneath loads of fish. Any way that the Danish people could help their neighbors, they did, and it's an amazing story. But I would go around the country years past and speak at Christian schools, and the kids who had read those stories wanted more stories about Peter and Elise Anderson. Well, the war had ended, so that series kind of had a cap to it.
Yeah.
But there was the Jewish character Henrik Melchior, who I decided, okay, he and his family are going to go to Israel, and we'll see what happens to them in Israel in 1948. When everything's happening and the state of Israel is being formed and there's this Arab-Israeli conflict and all those things going on there, quite a setting for more stories. And that's how the Promise of Zion stories came out. There's 6 more books there. So a lot of times there's spin-off characters that you can put into another environment and see what happens to them. And that gets interesting too.
Has there been any humorous or surprising moments along the way, not necessarily that wound up in your book, but as if you saw James Rubart's interview, he's talking about not winning an award, and what was that? That was funny.
Right, I remember that. I remember that one. Well, I haven't had the same experiences as James Rubart.
I hope not.
But that question in mind that you had given me earlier about funny experiences, I was thinking of that trip, that taxi ride in Jerusalem where I got stuck in front of the apartment buildings.
Right.
As doing research. Well, I laughed at it afterwards, but. And it ended up well. We got up to his apartment, and the character that I was but real man that I was wanting to interview, he was just amazing. He was originally Polish, but he spoke 7 different languages, including English and Hebrew and Swedish, and I don't even know what else. And his wife came in. She didn't speak any English. She was Middle Eastern, and she just came in with food and there was a Dutch couple there, and between there was 2 or 3 languages going around, and Zvi was telling his testimony, and the food was coming, and eat more.
Yeah.
So it reminds me how much I love doing off the cuff journalism style research.
Yeah.
In stories. It's a side benefit of being a fiction author, is that you get to talk to people, and most people will talk to you if you tell them you're writing a story. I had a correspondence relationship with a newspaper editor in a little town called Echuca on the Murray River in Australia, Central Australia. And he was so proud of his area there. He would send me all kinds of historical facts about the river and about riverboats during the 1850s, and about the bandits they had in the area, the carpetbagger kind of guys, and the wildlife, and so the research. Well, it's not funny necessarily, but it's a very fun part of fiction writing is making those relationships with people that are so interested in telling you their stories and how to weave the facts into a historical fiction story. That's why they call it historical fiction, I guess, is you blend history and you try and make it authentic and you have fictional characters, but it's one of my favorite ways to write, and no less in part because of the research involved, which is just fun.
Well, it's fun to pad your fictional character with real life things. It gives them a life and brings them to life.
Right. And the responsibility, there's a responsibility there too. And I've seen authors, not necessarily Christian authors, but I've seen authors cross the line where they make, how should I explain this? They take modern thought and transplant it into history in ways that are not really authentic. So you have a responsibility as a historical fiction author, I think, to accurately portray what people were like during those days and what they thought about and how they thought. And it's really not it just kind of rubs me the wrong way when people use historical fiction to take modern mores and modern thought and make you think that people were thinking that way when really it wasn't. So it takes a little more digging and a little more effort to portray a historical fiction accurately. Sometimes authors do that, and sometimes they don't. There's room for parody, and when it's obvious what you're doing, I suppose. But if it's people reading the book thinks, "Oh, really? People thought like that? I never knew that."
Yeah.
Well, they didn't.
No, they're not enlightened at all. Well, as busy as you are with writing, you also have a busy life. How do you balance everything with children and grandchildren and the whole deal?
Well, Mike, the best person to answer that question is probably my wife. Rhonda, you better answer this question for Mike. No, I'm kidding. How do I balance it? Boy, ever since I started in journalism and right out of college, I'm kind of a nose to the grindstone kind of guy, and just sit in front of that keyboard and pound away. And that's part of my journalism training, because I'm used to that feeling of having an editor looking over your shoulder or else peering at you from across the room like, "Elmer, we need that 500 words in about 4 minutes. Get it done."
Yeah.
So I can't seem to shake that. And so I come up to my office. I used to work for an ad agency as well for years, and I worked in marketing for a couple of universities. All writing related, but I'm semi-retired now officially, but I still come up to my office at 8 or 9 o'clock, and I write and I edit, and I'm working on books, and I come down for a quick lunch, and then I'm done at 5 o'clock and hang up my hat. So how do I balance work and everything else? Well, I'm still got my fingers glued to this keyboard here, and my wife will recommend that maybe I relax a little bit, but I still have all these stories I want to tell.
Yeah.
And there's kids that need, more than ever, within this crazy world, they need good stories, and good stories that'll point the way to Jesus Christ. And
sure.
So I as long as I still have, I think there was a saying a few years ago, I'll stop writing as soon as you pry my cold, dead fingers off the keyboard, or something like that. But
yeah, I'm sure there is. Yeah. People can find your books on Amazon and other places where fine books are sold.
Yeah. Mostly the oldest books, the ones, in fact, there's I got to tell a story about some of the older books here, but yeah, they're available on Amazon. You can the links are on my website, robertelmerbooks.com, and that'll take you right into Amazon.
Okay.
Some of them are ebooks, but all of them are paperback, so you can get paperback on demand. Some of the books that I've gotten the rights back to, and I just turn them back into Amazon. But I was going to say, it reminds me of the second and third generation. I guess it's second generation of people that are reading the oldest books now. I mean, the first books in the Young Underground series came out, as I mentioned, in the mid '90s, and kids read them then. But I'm getting letters now from teachers, librarians, homeschool moms who read the books when they were 12, and now they have their own kids, or they're homeschooling their own kids, or they have kids in the classroom, or they have kids in a library, and they're recommending those books to them now. So second generation is coming around and reading the books, and that is wonderful. But boy, it starts to make me feel a little bit older too.
Well, we do need to find that oldest person and tell them to knock it off, because they're dragging the rest of us with them.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. That's okay.
Is there a good, what's the best way for your readers to engage with you?
There's a reader email function, and I answer all my email that goes through on my website.
Okay.
It's email Robert. It's at the bottom of one of the pages, one of the first pages, I think. So it's at robertelmerbooks.com.
Well, this has really been a great conversation. I learned a lot, and it's been just fascinating for me to listen to how you absorb your material, or where you get it, and you certainly have a rich mind that I'm sure you can still excavate a lot of good stories out of. One thing that maybe you'd like to leave with the audience besides take notes?
Take notes. Well, I guess one thing that if you mentioned, I think in your questions, what advice I would have for an aspiring writer.
Oh, yeah.
We've been talking about aspiring readers and parents and homeschool parents and teachers, and those are the grandparents, people that are making decisions on what books their kids would write. And that's typically the audience that I'll talk to in an interview like this. But if you're an aspiring writer of historical fiction, I guess I would just have one thing that I was thinking of, and that is advice that did me well when I wrote my first book, and that is basically forget trends. Anything, my first tendency would be, let's go to the bookstore and see what's popular now, and then we'll write something that's just like it. No! I wrote A Way Through the Sea because I had a passion for sending along stories that my parents had experienced, and it meant something to me. And as it turns out, there weren't too many other books that boys would like, and girls too, of course. Girls read anything. But boys are more picky, and they like certain kinds of stories. And I understood that, being a boy myself at one point. And so I just wrote it with a passion to present a story, and it doesn't matter if anybody else has written a story that featured kids in Denmark during World War II, but as it happens, there weren't too many others, those, especially from a Christian perspective.
Right.
So my advice to aspiring writers is to forget trends. Don't try and copy something. Don't do another Amish vampire story or anything else that's very popular at the time, because even if you did write a good story, by the time it comes out, the trend will be gone. You'll be chasing the wind. So anyway, that's my parting shot, is to write your passion.
Good advice. Good advice. Well, as we close out here, can we have a word of prayer?
Absolutely.
Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the gift that Robert has of writing and reaching young people. His books present the gospel in a kind of a casual, everyday, yes, this is normal kind of way. And I know that as the one note he got, there's a bunch more that probably could be written. So we just thank you for the gift that you've given all Christian fiction writers to put biblical principles in the hands of readers for their gift of putting their faith down on paper. And we just ask that you bless his continued work and spread your grace richly out on all of us. And we just give you all the thanks, Lord. In thy name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mike. It's been an honor to be on your show or your podcast. It's great sharing with you.
I felt like the honor was all mine. And thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us here on this podcast.
Thanks for what you do.
Thank you, sir. You have a good day.
You too.
I found that to be just a very interesting interview. I loved the stories about Robert's grandparents and what they went through living over in Denmark and that area. All of these Christian authors are just fantastic. They stimulate good conversation. So I do hope you enjoy getting to know these authors that I present here on the Wordsmith Forge Christian Fiction podcast. I hope you'll support them by looking for their books, leaving reviews for them. I'm extremely interested in what you think of this podcast, so please comment with any suggestions you might have, like who would you like for me to interview? If you find these podcasts informative, please share them with your friends. If you found them inspirational, please subscribe. And if you find them both inspirational and informative, share them with the whole wide world any way you can. Don't forget to like us, because I have high hopes for the Wordsmith Forge Christian Fiction podcast, and I hope you do too. Until next time, may God bless you abundantly and cover you with his amazing grace. Keep reading clean. This is Mike Baines, out.